All right. What the
Okay, who's got the strongest opinion here about the border stuff?
I think I might have the strongest case.
Go.
That's
Oh,
mine.
come on.
What do you mean, come on?
You sound absolutely ridiculous right now.
Can you get to the state of the argument instead of going personal?
I'm asking you, have you ever been to the
Wait,
border? Do you know what's going on right now?
So,
you sound
can you make the argument without going personal? Why don't you stick to the argument and stop trying to attack the person making it?
Okay, I'm dragging in the next lot. Good luck.
Wait, hold on.
Do you see the statement from Greg Abbott defying the Supreme Court? I did not. Texas holding the line despite Supreme Court defeat. Even though the Border Patrol now has the legal ability to cut the razor wire installed by the state of Texas southern border, it doesn't appear Texas will let them do it without a fight. Ooh, where's Pisco? I feel like this is a super, super, super interesting conflict. Because I think immigration is pretty clearly within the United States federal wheelhouse, but it also absolutely has an effect on states, right? A disproportionate effect even. So I think it's super interesting what the resolution would look like. Governor's full statement. The federal government has broken the compact between the United States and the states. The executive branch of the United States has a constitutional duty to enforce federal laws protecting states, including immigration laws on the books right now. President Biden has refused to enforce those laws and has even violated them. The result is that he has smashed records for illegal immigration. I don't think this is strictly true, or rather, like, it might be strictly true, but not as much true. But despite having been put on notice in a series of letters, one of which I delivered to him by hand, President Biden has ignored Texas's demands that he perform his constitutional duties. President Biden has violated his oath to faithfully execute immigration laws enacted by Congress. Instead of prosecuting immigrants for the federal crime of illegal entry, President Biden has sent his lawyers into federal courts to sue Texas for taking action to secure the border. President Biden has instructed his agencies to ignore federal statutes that mandate the detention of illegal immigrants. The effect is to illegally allow their en masse parole into the United States. By wasting taxpayer dollars to tear open Texas's border security infrastructure, President Biden has enticed illegal immigrants away from the 28 legal entry points along the state's southern border, bridges where nobody drowns, and into the dangerous waters of the Rio Grande. Under President Biden's lawless border policies, more than 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years. These are usually like encounters. They're not like full off, like these many have entered and now remain and stay in the United States indefinitely or whatever. This is more than the population of 33 different states in this country. This illegal refusal to protect the states has inflicted unprecedented harm on the people all across the United States. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and the other visionaries who wrote the U.S. Constitution foresaw that states should not be left to the mercy of a lawless president who does nothing to stop external threats like cartels smuggling millions of illegal immigrants across the border. This is why the framers included both Article 4, Section 4, which promises that the federal government shall protect each state against invasion. We should have like a I should just read the Constitution on stream at some point. I've never done like a full reading. Or maybe I did like in high school. Also, why does it take so long for everything to load on this computer? I feel like I'm having like, it's always like weird like DNS problems or something. Article 4, Constitution of the United States. Full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state, and the Congress may, by general laws, prescribe the manner of which such acts, records, and proceedings shall be proved and the effect thereof. Section 2, the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. A person charged in any state with treason, felony, or other crime who shall flee from justice and be found in another state shall, on demand of the executive authority of the state from which he fled, be delivered up to be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping in another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service and labor may be due. So Section 1 is basically reciprocity between like all of our record keeping and everything between states, which makes sense. It should be that way, right? And like legal stuff. Section 2 has to do with like basically if you murder someone in one state, go to another state, that state is going to extradite you back to the main one, which also makes sense, right? You can't be fleeing into other states, escaping legal actions from other states. New states may be admitted by the Congress into the Union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of another state, nor any state be formed by the junction of two or more states or parts of states without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned as well as of the Congress. The Congress shall have power to dispose of or dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claim to the United States or any other particular state. Yeah, you can't merge or separate states or like add states to other states, whatever, obviously. And then section 4, the one that was brought up, was the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasions and on application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature can be convened against domestic violence. Do you think this is where you get the authority for like calling the National Guard in? I feel like this has to do with like war stuff. Like, or foreign invaders and not necessarily immigration, but maybe section 4 of article 4 has been invoked for immigration. I'm not sure. I'd have to see the legislative history on that. Oh, and article 1 section 10 clause 3. Article 1 section 10. Micro PA is going to debate live. Cool. Article 1 section 10. Article 1 section 10 Clause 3. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty or tonnage. Am I in the right part? Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3. Keep troops or ships of war in times of peace, enter in any agreement or compact with another state or with a foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. I don't know how this applies either. Which reserves to this state the right of self-defense. For these reasons, I have already declared an invasion. Oh, okay, well, that's how. Under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, to invoke Texas's constitutional authority to defend and protect itself. That authority is the supreme law of the land and supersedes any federal statutes to the contrary. The Texas National Guard, the Texas Department of Public Safety, and other Texas personnel are acting on that authority as well as state law to secure the Texas border. Okay, that's interesting. I wonder what his background is. So they're always like attorneys, huh? Oh, he was an attorney. Huh. Do you think governor is like the second most prestigious position in the United States? Or do you think like being a senator or vice president or like Speaker of the House would be more prestigious? Depends on the state. Actually, yeah, it probably does depend on the state, huh? Like if you were from Indiana or like Idaho, you'd probably rather be a federal senator, state senator in the federal government. Secretary of State is a big one too. Yeah, but like mayor of New York City might be a bigger deal than being like the governor of like Iowa. Maybe? I'm not sure actually. I don't know. Governors have a lot of power. Here's a good comeback. In 2020, would California have the right to prevent non-vaccinated Americans from entering through America's western ports because they feel it's their right to protect their citizens? Ooh, I feel like no. But I don't know the legal answers to these. I've only like recently, like this year or a few months ago, like within the past couple months, have been like getting into the actual legal, like the super legal arguments, not just like my feeling on the legal stuff, but like trying to read actual legal statutes or papers or, yeah. The U.S. government should federalize the National Guard, take immediate control, and stop at once the lawlessness of Governor Abbott's policies. If he attempts to oppose these actions by force, the DOJ should arrest the governor charged with seditious conspiracy. Are you ever going to do a deep dive on the corruption in the Miami government? No, probably not. The difference is they are Americans, the migrants are not? Sure.
Are you like Are you befuddled by Abbott?
Befuddled? I'm not sure. What do you think about like immigration law and the federal government and states affected by immigration law? Do you have like general feelings on it?
Policy-wise or legally?
Yeah, I guess legally. Let's say that like, before we dive into this in particular, let's say that you have 5 states that feel they're disproportionately affected by immigration law, but the Congress decides not to do anything about it, and then these 5 states feel particularly disenfranchised. How do they like seek remedy in this situation? Like, what's their path to doing anything?
They don't. They vote for president.
So you're just fucked?
Or they vote for their congresspeople to pass new laws.
Yeah, but assuming they're always like a minority.
Then they lose. That's called democracy. Do you deny that if Congress wanted to, it could just open the borders?
If Congress wanted to, I think so, right?
If Congress wanted to pass laws, say no more immigration law, everyone can come in.
Yeah, I mean, obviously giving exception to like the president and wartime powers or whatever other bullshit. Yeah, sure, yeah.
States don't have the authority to do that. It's been long recognized now, after numerous cases, sometimes that go against Democrats who want to do certain things, and sometimes, especially against non-citizens who want to have some sort of rights or want some substantive rights to stay in the country, that the power of the United States government, not the state governments, is a broad and some even say plenary authority. That has been interpreted for years and years and years. Since the Chinese exclusion cases, it's been referred to as the plenary power doctrine. Actually, that terminology is more recent, but at least we have acknowledged and understood that federal power over immigration matters is supreme. If Congress wanted to, it could pass a law tomorrow that expelled all the all the green card holders. It wanted to. It could. If Congress wanted to, it could get rid of all immigration laws. And there ain't nothing a state can do about it. It's not their authority to do so.
Okay.
What about that logic is unclean?
The logic is clean. It just seems like obviously very unsatisfying.
Well, there's a procedure for it, and that's called democracy, and it's
well, you keep saying
for
democracy, but this would literally be a tyranny of the majority, right? Like it wouldn't work here. Like saying like there's a procedure for like disenfranchising black people in slavery, we would say, well, actually, in this case, we're going to be undemocratic, or we think we can be more democratic by being undemocratic and limiting people's abilities to discriminate against certain people, right? So that would be arguably like an undemocratic measure, but we would say this undemocratic measure is the two wolves and a lamb.
Undemocratic? You think it's undemocratic for the nation to pass immigration laws, to elect a president, and to have that president enforce them in the way that they're allowed to under the law?
Well,
that's undemocratic?
The issue is that the Congress has the ability to legislate and rule on things in ways that disproportionately heavily impact some states. I think that's the issue that the people in those states have.
Yeah. One example of that is slavery, where certain states were going to be more negatively affected by a federal policy that limited the expansion of slavery. And one of the arguments, that's not fair for us, the states who rely on slavery or slave labor. That's never been we're a union of states. And yes,
sure. Although while that's true, I think the comparison is a bit different because you're talking about like a whole change of policy rather than like enforcement of policy that we're kind of supposed to agree on, right?
Let's stop with the whole notion that Biden isn't enforcing immigration.
Yeah, actually, hold on. Yeah, I don't want to get into that real quick. I was just kind of because you are right. Because my next question, because getting into the Texas thing, we have to actually look at like what are the facts of the matter,
yes.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
So imagine that Biden wasn't actually enforcing any immigration law. I even think in that case that Texas has no role in the maintenance of the borders, except to the extent that by grace the executive or Congress allows them to.
Sure.
If they want to allow them to help with the immigration matters, that's one thing. But if the federal government is displacing state enforcement or state maintenance, that is totally separate. And they're incompatible. And the federal government just wins. You might not like that, and that might make you upset that I'm saying this. That's just reality. And if
You're
want
using
to be
you in the general sense there, right?
Yeah, you and the royal you. You might not like that listener, conservative on YouTube chatter, but that's just the way our system works with respect to immigration. And it couldn't work otherwise. Like imagine that it's not just immigration either. it's interstate borders. Texas could be like, well, we're getting all this economic pain and suffering from our neighboring states. They wouldn't be allowed to just like erect a border around Texas and block off another state, even though they might think it's in their interest to do so for whatever reason. If let's say that the neighbor,
Yeah,
to
a little bit,
Texas-
but that's a little bit different because that's like an explicit. Is it Article 4 section? It's because like there the Constitution explicitly says you're not allowed from one state to another to do
we've
that.
interpreted the plenary power of federal government over immigration to be just as vital to the national sovereignty of the United States.
Sure.
This is a country with where is the power of the national government more at its peak than when dealing with international issues?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think that I think that probably the more compelling conversation then has to do with the facts on the ground, like what's actually happening, I guess.
Yeah. So this is what's actually happening.
Wait. Also, as a real quick question, because you asked, what if the president wasn't enforcing the particular immigration law? Wouldn't that be like isn't that what everybody's worried about for constitutional crises? Because technically, like, what do you do if the executive doesn't enforce a law passed by Congress? Like, what are you supposed to do there? I don't know. Besides impeachment, I guess.
Yeah, you could try to do an impeachment, which they're trying right now. It's totally baseless because, as we'll talk about in a second, Biden is absolutely enforcing immigration law. But if you really felt that Biden wasn't fulfilling his oath to take care that the law is executed, you could absolutely try to impeach him before. And I don't even think that that's a groundless conceptual reason to impeach a president. If they're just not enforcing federal criminal law, for example, I think that might be a justified basis to impeach a president for sure.
Okay.
But the process isn't, well, everyone's on their own, anarcho-capitalism, base Governor Abbott gets to do whatever he wants, no matter what.
Sure.
And you wouldn't say that if there were a Democrat or left-wing state that was like, we don't like this policy from the Congress on the border maintenance, so we're just going to tear down this piece of wall, or we're gonna make a tunnel, and we're gonna, even though it's not crossing the border at the specific port of entry, we're gonna find some way to undermine the border policy of the United States to make it more lenient and less, like, we would not allow that. And it's different from the case law that prevents state governments from being mandated to help out or to voluntarily trying to help out when they're not asked to help out on the enforcement of immigration law. Those are different. One, it's about staying in your lane, and the lane of the state governments is not to enforce federal immigration law. It's not, or to embed their own law, or to maintain their own border. That's the national sovereignty of the United States government, and they should stop.
What is Abbott's claim that like Biden is not enforcing? What is it? What is the claim right now?
It's complete gaslighting bullshit. Because there are a lot of border apprehensions, there are a lot of border encounters, and because there's a lot of immigration at the moment, his argument is, well, therefore Biden's not enforcing the law, which is total bullshit. Biden is enforcing federal immigration law. He just is. The immigration courts are packed. Anyone who at all practices in this area knows this. The number of cases to pretend that like the Executive Office for Immigration Review is not inundated with cases, that the loads are ridiculous. And right now, Biden is trying to debate and argue for a compromise deal to increase funding for border security, trying to legislatively get to some solution here. He's not asleep at the wheel. He's absolutely enforcing immigration law. He's deporting all thousands and thousands of people. Those of you who believe the nonsense that he's not enforcing the border law or immigration law, you are buying propaganda and bullshit. He is. And in fact, a lot of left-wing people are upset because he's I would say not totally the same as Trump in his immigration policies, and he's rolled back a lot of I think bad immigration policies from Trump, but he hasn't gotten rid of all of them. He's still enforcing elements of the Trump immigration strategy.
All right.
And he's obviously still apprehending people.
We're gonna see. I'm dragging them up. Let's see what they have to say. Mew,
Yo,
what are you in the channel for?
I wanted to give a reasonable disagreement from a Western perspective on Ukraine support.
Oh, listen. Later. Love you.
Okay.
Who's here for immigration? Mel. Okay. Encar.
What's up?
Are you here for immigration?
No.
Bettman.
Yes.
Are you here for immigration?
Nope. Kick me.
Okay, well, never mind. I just don't know the facts, I guess, of what people are contesting as much. Because I don't know what's going on with Texas. What?
Why don't we talk about what to do with Texas?
What
should be done?
Oh.
Let's talk about what should be done. If it's the case that the federal government decides that they want to get rid of these fencing, these barriers, this whatever, wired fence, Texas has absolutely no right to stymie that decision for whatever reason. And they can kick and scream all they want. If they are trying to obstruct the enforcement of federal immigration law, they should be punished. There should be consequences. And if they try to do so by force, there should be major consequences. And I think it's absolutely insane if the Biden administration tolerates what's going on here. They should assert their authority and take complete control of the situation right now and stop this lawlessness at the southern border from the Texas state officials.
All right. Well,
you disagree?
No, I don't. I don't know enough about the facts on the ground though to like have a strong opinion on it. Every state has its own National Guard, right? Or its own guard? Am I making that up?
No,
or?
National Guard, yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so like the Texas National Guard, that's not a federal entity, right? That's a state entity?
They're dual roles. So they're typically under the command and control of the governor of a state.
Okay.
But they can be nationalized, and there are specific grants of authority for the president to nationalize or to federalize, I should say, the National Guard. And one such source of authority is if it's required to stop the obstruction of federal law in a state, or to put down insurrection or rebellion. And I think that if there's an attempt by the Biden administration to stop the policy of Texas, and Texas refuses, I think that Biden should absolutely federalize the National Guard and make this an issue. Because to do anything less than that is allowing Texas to obstruct federal immigration law.
What? Why are these people joining this room? Arm, what are you here for? The Texas State Guard is a completely separate entity from the National Guard. Okay, does every state have a state guard?
I think Texas has some unique military of its own as part of its history of independence. But I'm referring to the Texas National Guard, which it has, as well as its state apparatuses.
I would imagine states would not be allowed to do that. States can raise their own militaries?
I don't know exactly the justification of it. It could just be a unique thing of Texas. I think it is.
Huh. Okay.
I'm curious where all your conservatives in the YouTube chat that always want to debate this stuff. I've been getting a lot of dummies adding me on Twitter. Sorry, X.
True. Bayo.
Hey, what's up? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Yes, most states can have a state guard and a federal guard. The state guard usually will just be funded by the state, and then the regular National Guard is federal and state.
Okay. Do you disagree with anything?
Yeah, so with the border decision,
What's up with your shit?
Yeah, your mic is kind of...
There's not been a significant increase in the federal funds to supplement what's happening in Texas, so Texas is having to bear all the cost.
What do you want me to say to that? They have to bear all the costs. They also have other benefits to being a part of the union. They also have other detriments. Other places have other benefits and detriments by virtue of where they exist. That doesn't give them the authority to take power they don't have. If you have a problem with how immigration law is enforced, vote. Elections have consequences. If you think Biden is doing a bad job, vote. There's no remedy to just steal power from the federal government.
Right. So if say somebody's coming across Texas border, Arizona border, New Mexico border, what right do they have to use state resources rather than federal resources once they get into that state? Because once they get into that state, they have to cross.
Different question. We're not talking about whether Texas has to provide, its schools or its resources to pay for undocumented people or anything like that. We're just talking about the ability for Texas to defy the border policies of the United States government.
Right. So basically, it would be preventing the ports of entry from operating. Right.
Say that last part again.
It would basically be for ports of entry to operate.
No, I don't think that the immigration authority only extends to ports of entry. I think that Texas has no right to tell individuals that generally that they can't be in their state. What power is that? Do you think Texas has the power to like banish people?
No. But the federal government, they're in charge of the ports of entry. So you have
Eric,
ports of entry, people coming in, and then you have the areas between the ports of entry. If no one is adequately defending the areas between the ports of entry,
they don't get to decide that. They don't get to decide what's adequate and what's inadequate. The people get to decide
so
what
the
is
jurisdiction of each property between the ports of entry is on the federal government, not the state government.
The federal government gets to decide what is adequate border enforcement. What's too much, what's too little, what's the Goldilocks amount. Texas doesn't have a right to say this is too little, too no. Well, they can say it, but they can't enforce their preferences on the country. The United States government is an entity that enforces immigration law. And it doesn't just extend, it's broader than just border policy. It's broader than that. If the president, if he wanted to, could like parole every single illegal immigrant into the United States. He has statutory authority that extends that far. It's crazy how much authority he's been granted by Congress.
No, absolutely. But a sheriff has jurisdiction over a county, right? And you have
over what? Sorry, over what?
Over a county or area.
Does Texas have jurisdiction over a county?
No, like a sheriff in a county.
Texas is sovereign. Texas is sovereign, but there's two nucleuses of sovereignty here, and to the extent that it's incompatible with United States sovereignty wins. And so yes, Texas has control over conduct within its borders to some extent, but not to the extent of defying or undermining or conflicting with immigration law enforcement by the federal government.
Right, but if a state has said this is causing a public safety emergency or public health emergency, and you have 200 miles of border that is not being cared to by the federal government, is the state supposed to just let whatever's going to happen there happen?
I don't understand. So your point presupposes that Texas has a right to conduct border policy in contradiction to what the United States government says.
Well, they already there are already MOAs and memorandums of agreement between the Texas Department of Public Safety, Texas National Guard operating under a state agency with Operation Lone Star, and before that, Operation Guardian Shield. They are.
The state can agree with itself all at once, right? You can have
they have an agreement with the federal government.
Okay, that's different. Yeah, if the federal government makes an agreement with the state, that's different. Then the state is acting as a functionary and as a agent of the federal government. There's plenty of precedent for that. What we're talking about is if there's an incompatible preference or policy from the federal government, it's not up to the states to obstruct that.
Would this not just be a mechanism of how they are obstructing it? Because they already have the mission to go obstruct it via DPS, troopers, et cetera, et cetera.
No. So an enforcement policy always has trade-offs and balances. Like, we don't enforce all laws to the maximal extent, sometimes because we have a lack of resources, right? In the case of immigration, we simply have a lack of an ability to enforce immigration law perfectly. Everyone acknowledges that. There is no capacity currently in our DHS to enforce the law perfectly, even if it wanted to. But even if it did have that capacity, it's a matter of policy for the government to say, we want to enforce the immigration up to here, but not further. We want to enforce immigration law in this respect. We want to enforce immigration law by having one barrier, by having two barriers, by having see-through barriers, by having barbed wire, that's all up to the federal government. States don't have a role in that.
So what about private? So you have a private landowner on the border. Can he erect a fence on his property?
Not if it's in conflict with federal policy.
So if he's 20 feet back from the border, and there's the Rio Grande's right there. He has the property 20 feet back from the border. He
Thing
can't
called
put the property on
eminent
his fence.
domain. It's a thing called eminent domain. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, no, absolutely have.
Yeah.
But so they would have to go and eminently domain each individual property down there to stop those people from coming across into those individual pieces of land for that immigration policy.
The government could seize that property and give some just compensation in return. But once they do, like, they have that authority because it couldn't be otherwise. Imagine if private citizen ownership of land could prevent the national government from exercising its sovereignty to exclude who it wants when it wants. The countries can't work that. Imagine, like, all right, I'm going to buy up all the land on the border, and when I do that, I'm just going to let everyone in.
Okay, so kind of shifting gears a little bit to the main question I actually
Wait, do you agree with anything? Do you disagree with anything I just said?
No.
All this-
Legally, I completely agree with you.
Okay,
I
if
think
you
it's
agree with
just
me
a
legally,
conundrum.
then you should condemn what's going on in Texas. You should have some balls, and you should say,
I don't
Abbott,
condemn it because I think what the reality is in Texas and what the reality of what's coming across the border, and due to what happened in 2021 when OGS was shut down and the enforcements and our ability to enforce the border policy went down dramatically.
but you just said you agreed with everything I said legally. But
No,
so
I do.
you're okay with Texas breaking the law?
Yes, for public safety.
Okay. As long as
Yeah,
you admit
because
it.
I do because so Operation Guardian Shield. Are you familiar with that?
Is
Is that when
some
the
Obama
Texas
policy?
Rangers or whatever went
I don't
down?
know.
Oh, never mind.
No, remind us.
No. So OGS it started in 2018 under Trump. It basically surged a shit ton of National Guard down to the border. So you had, I think it was like 48,000 guardsmen over the span of 2018, 2019 that went down, and they were operating pole cams. I was the liaison doing the aircraft stuff for it. In one of the sectors, we were putting ISR aircraft, things like that down there to help enforcement. Because Border Patrol just doesn't have the personnel. AMO, OFO, the Office of Field Operations, and Customs and Border Protection, they can't physically take care of all of the quote-unquote encounters that they have down there. So we were helping them out as the guard. That was ended both due to COVID, I think, and due to policy change. But that allowed apprehensions to actually increase. If you go look at the numbers for 2019, it looks like there was a massive spike in immigration. It was actually a low immigration year, but there was, I think, a 43% increase in the amount of encounters and apprehensions that happened along the border. Because that policy ended, now you have the same amount of immigration coming across, but you don't have the enforcement mechanisms to actually get those people. So that large number of people coming to the border, I don't know what we were supposed to tell a state to do.
Yeah, you're saying break the law. They should break the law.
Yes, because I mean we've seen.
Aren't we a country of laws? Aren't we a country of laws?
We're also a country that is capable of defending its borders, but we're choosing not to.
Oh, okay, but then pass a law. Then vote for Trump this election if you think that he's going to do a better job. If that's what you think. But don't tell me that the state government is allowed to defy the federal government on issues of immigration, because that's bullshit. And that, there are similar people who said similar things about certain enforcement of other federal laws back in the 1860s. And those comparisons, that can't be the reality we live in, where states get to decide when they break the law and when they follow the law.
I agree with you legally. I think we have a disagreement morally on, not morally, because you probably want the border defended as much as I want the border defended, but I think because the states have seen the reality that the country can actually put a dent in immigration, but they're choosing not to. I think the representatives of those states at the local level and the state level
break the law. How can you say that? It sounds like you're law enforcement, right? We swear an oath. We swear an oath to the Constitution. We swear an oath to uphold the Constitution. And there's a little part of the Constitution called the Supremacy Clause of the United States that says that the Constitution and the federal laws made pursuant to the Constitution are the supreme law of the land. Anything in the state laws or state constitutions notwithstanding. The Constitution of the United States explicitly calls out contradictory state laws and contradictory constitutional provisions as not being able to supersede the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution and federal laws made pursuant to it. How can you swear an oath to the Constitution and then willingly say, I want to violate that? I want to violate the supremacy clause of the United States.
Well,
I think it's
there's
good.
a difference there between me actually doing that thing and me thinking a policy position that somebody in the state.
You say you just said you're in favor of it. You just said you support it.
No, I
You support
those
violating the oath of the
policymakers.
Constitution.
If I was that policymaker, I might have a different stance on it because I would be in. So
your stance on whether or not you support the breaking of your oath to the Constitution would depend on whether or not you were actually in the position to do something about it. That's a scary world, folks.
If it was my responsibility to ensure the safety of the people on the border of Texas and those communities down there, then yeah, I would have to take
No. Your first and principal oath is to the Constitution of the United States. That's your first oath. That's what binds our country together. And any other thing is secondary to that. I thought. When you're in the military, isn't the the first allegiance to the Constitution of the United States? But what you're saying is
first allegiance to the Constitution is also to life on the eyesight of U.S. citizens.
Wait, sorry, say that one more time.
To life and limb of U.S. citizens and the U.S. Constitution. So if there's something happening and you have to interject in it, and there's a question of legality, then you say.
Hang on a second. No one is saying that Texas cannot use its state law enforcement to do certain targeted actions to defend their people. No one's saying
so
that.
They can
to the extent.
No. Mobilize them in the state guard status, put them all across the board. You just couldn't have the razor wire.
No. You cannot try to enforce immigration law as the state. The state can enforce its criminal law, but of course, just because illegal immigrants are, increasing economic burdens, or illegal immigrants have a greater propensity to commit crime, doesn't give you a right to shoot them. You can arrest them if they commit crimes. You can arrest them if they violate the law of Texas in other ways, but you can't enforce immigration law. You can't usurp the power of the federal government. And that should be a plain, you yourself agree with me on that. I shouldn't have to explain that. But you're saying that you're okay with Texas violating that and violating their oath, which acknowledges the supremacy of federal law on immigration.
I don't think that so the razor wire, I wasn't in that decision-making process. I don't know how that legally was justified.
Whether you were or not, do you support it?
So the razor wire, not necessarily. I don't know much about the razor wire itself. But the state having its individuals on the border enforcing federal policy, which is you can't come across the border between a port of entry if you're Title, I can't remember the numbers, 8 or 42. You can't come across the border.
The state doesn't get to decide that. The state doesn't get to decide whether or not it is or is not enforcing federal law. The federal government will be telling the state whether or not they're going to be, allowed to be used as part of an instrumentality to defend or to support immigration law. But the state doesn't get to unilaterally decide, hey, we're just following the law of Congress. Congress was very specific in who they wanted to enforce immigration law. Initially, under the Department of Justice, and now under the Department of Homeland Security, which is the enforcement part of it. And obviously, those cases go up to the Executive Office for Immigration Review. That's the enforcement structure. And to say that we should have this, it's free reign for any border states that want to enforce the border however they want. It's an invitation to chaos.
So it has to be a state law for a state entity to enforce it. Is what you're saying?
It needs to be, in order for a state to be involved, there needs to be federal cooperation. It needs to be voluntary. It needs to be consensual. The federal government has had this authority from time immemorial for the start of our country, right? Like we understand. Now it's true that state officials have enforced aspects of federal law before, but that's with the consent of the federal government, but never in defiance of it.
There's currently memorandums of agreement in place between Texas DPS and Texas National Guard, working in a state status as well as in a federalized status, to enforce border policy, which is to stop or stem illegal immigration via increasing encounters and apprehensions.
Then why is the Biden administration in court? Why is the Biden administration in court against Texas? If there's agreement,
I believe it would be the optics of the razor wire. If I was just guessing. Because
but then there's no agreement, right? Is there an agreement between the Biden administration?
Yes.
Hold on.
They're
Also, I just wanted to say this because I've seen this come up in like every single chat. People keep trying to bring up sanctuary cities as a counter to this. I don't believe, I could be wrong, but I don't believe there's any like legislative action from Congress or any part of the Constitution that demands that states cooperate with the federal government in order to do things like turning over immigrants. I don't think that's part of our Constitution.
Nor could they.
The
federal government cannot commandeer the state enforcement apparatus either, right?
Now,
this
if it was the case
street.
that, like, I think sometimes people, misunderstand what sanctuary cities mean, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but like, a sanctuary city does not mean that like if you make it there as an illegal, you're either going to get citizenship or you're like safe from the feds or anything like that. Like, I'm pretty sure a federal agency, the DHS, could still find you in a sanctuary city and deport you. Yeah. It's just that officials or law enforcement in those cities just won't like generally voluntarily turn somebody over to DHS if they think they might be like they just don't ask those questions because they're not interested in it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And you can't, the federal government also can't do certain things. They can't commandeer Texas State Guard and be like, hey, you have to enforce immigration law.
Although also be careful because when you're comparing this to the sanctuary city thing, to make the sanctuary city thing comparable to Texas would be like saying California could say, listen, we actually disagree with Trump's Muslim ban, or we disagree with these countries. We're actually going to let whoever we want fly into California, into LAX, and we're going to say that like we're going to tell the DHS, Homeland Security, TSA, we're going to just have LAX police here. We're going to let whoever wants to fly into the country fly into here and be here, and we're going to let them into the United States because we think that we disagree with Trump's ban. Now, California can't do that because that's immigration policy, which is in the purview of the United States, right? They can't decide or dictate the enforcement or anything like that. Yeah.
Well, I think though with sanctuary cities, some of the states had either statutes, I don't know, laws, whatever they would call them, directives to city entities that they are barred from assisting the federal government in making removal actions. Is that correct?
That's a matter of their policy. They can do that. Yeah. Why can't they?
So
why can't they say we don't talk to the federal?
Well, a city can go to the feds. The feds say, hey, we have supremacy here. We are getting these people out, and we need assistance doing that. They're breaking a federal law.
You can't commandeer the state officials. You can't. They're state officials. And the federal government also has an obligation to stay out of domains that are squarely in the purview of the state, right? Like the federal government couldn't take all the state police force of California and say you have to enforce federal drug law now. That would be commandeering.
Right. I'm not as spun up on sanctuary cities.
There's no comparison here. We should go back to the base principle, and I think you should agree with me. Listen, I know I'm being an asshole, I'm being whatever, but it's just because I feel very strongly that we cannot allow defiance of the Constitution. And you just agreed that I think you agreed, and you can say maybe now that you don't agree. Whatever you want to take back what you said, that's fine. But I thought you agreed with us on the federal government's supremacy in immigration matters, and that to do what Texas is doing and trying to change what immigration law is would be illegal, and therefore it would be in contravention of the supremacy clause, and therefore it would be violating the Constitution. And how can you say that it's good or you want that?
Hang on, let me put it more like this. I agree with the Supreme Court's decision, and whatever they decide is the way that the Constitution is being interpreted. I agree with that.
Okay,
As
cool.
it stands now, and that decision's been made. I also agree with the state's responsibility to the citizens of that state to assist in the public safety, and if there's memorandums in place and or MOAs, whatever you want to call them, in place to assist with enforcing the federal policy, I think that the state, however legally they can do it, should be doing that to the highest degree they can. Now, razor wire has been taken off the board, but if they wanted to state mobilize the guard and put them across the border in order to fulfill the agreement they already had with the federal government, I have no problem with that.
I don't have no problem with states making agreements with the federal government to help enforce immigration law. What I have a problem with is states doing anything contrary to federal enforcement of immigration law. That's what I have a problem with. And I also have a problem with people lying about the administration.
If the razor wire was contrary, the part that was contrary to it, and not actually enforcing the policy, then I have no problem with them saying, "Hey, get rid of the razor wire." Cool. All right. Well,
but come on, Bayo. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. That they're going to court about this shit. They don't agree on it. Clearly.
Right, but there's also the optical fight that comes with immigration every time because we know that there's
whether
no
it's
optical
optical or substantive. Whether it's optical or substantive, it's dispositive. That is, there is a disagreement based on optics or based on substance or based on policy, whatever you want to say it. There's a disagreement, and if the disagreement exists, there's one party that wins, and the winner is Biden. The winner isn't Abbott.
Okay. Well, okay, so Abbott is in control of Department of Public Safety, the Rangers, and the state guard or the state militia outside of the federalized National Guard, right?
Yeah, he's in charge of all those entities.
Okay. And he wants to say at Eagle Pass. He wants to go down to Eagle Pass and Del Rio areas and put guards from there to assist in the already standing MOAs away from the border 2 miles. Is that okay?
If he's doing it with the express consent of the federal government, that's fine, yeah. Because then you have two-way agreement, right? Like, the federal government is not forcing Abbott, and Abbott is not in violation of the federal government supremacy.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I agree with that.
I guess like here's like I think this is like a really simple thing is to look at like make an event that's like the contrapositive of this. So Texas doesn't want immigrants, so Texas is hardcore trying to do their form of border enforcement. What if California wanted immigrants, so they started tearing down the wall? Would we be okay with that? Like, let's say California's like, actually, we love agricultural workers and everything, so we're going to go to the border and we're going to use the California State Patrol to start destroying the wall to let more people in. Would that be okay?
Or paving? If you don't want the destruction thing, they're paving the roads. They're making it easier. Whatever way you want to say it.
Well, during the Trump administration, California was very adamant about allowing any further border wall construction, and they actually limited the amount that federal RPAs could fly over into their airspace, despite it being federal airspace.
Hold on, wait. California was able to restrict their airspace?
No, sorry. They raised a big fucking stink about it, and it was when you get down sub 3,000 feet, and you're talking about flying state to state, they can, I can't remember the technical term for it, but there was some restrictions they could put. Oh, it was landing. So that you could not land a UH-72 Lakota is the aircraft that was flying. So they would fly Arizona, New Mexico areas, and then they might need to land and refuel or drop somebody off in California. They were not allowed to touch down in California because that was California's soil, right?
Wait, so I don't know if California has California soil that's not like also under the purview of the federal government for purposes of like federal government enforcement, no?
Well, that absolutely happened during OGS, for example.
Hold on, wait. Can you real quick? I'm not accusing you of lying, or whatever. Because the specific actions taken are important here. What are you claiming happened, or what can I look up? Like, what's something I could Google for an article to see this?
I don't think this would be totally anecdotal, and you would have to take it completely good faith.
Oh, fuck. Because I'm curious, or like, Pisco, you can answer. Like, if the federal government was going to do something, does a state have the authority to be like, sorry, no, you can't land at this airport, or you're not allowed to do something? If the federal government is doing something in the purview of the job of the federal government?
I doubt it, but I don't know for sure.
So if it is, it had to do with guard assets. So
had to do with what?
National Guard asset. So it was Arizona National Guard assets flying in Arizona. So they would pick somebody up, but they're carrying a Fed on board to do their enforcement action. They pick them up somewhere in Arizona, and they're flying over, and they cross into California. Once they crossed into California, there was nothing that federal officer or that aircraft would do other than call somebody and say, hey, somebody walked over. And then it was on the feds in California to actually come over and interdict that person. To find anything on it, it would probably be UH-72 or UH-72 Lakotas and New Mexico and California, because New Mexico was doing the same thing. Their governor basically made the same policy. So
I understand a fucking word you just said.
Yeah, your mic is also really, really, really bad. Wait, what kind of microphone are you using?
I'm on mobile. I was at the gym and nobody was arguing. So.
Oh, fuck. Okay, it's kind of hard to make out. You're not just on mobile. You're on like you're on some kind of like AirPod thing, but not actually AirPods. You're using like another like in earbud thing that's like you're talking to us through, right?
Yeah, I can head to the house and hop back in when I get there. It's like 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes.
Or just talking to your phone's microphone would be a lot better too. But I understand if it's weird that you don't want it screaming out in the. Massachusetts National Guard sends helicopter to help patrol southwest border. This was linked by Puppy Gups. Was this supposed to be the story that he was talking about, or this is related?
I don't know. Why that's relevant. We have everything we need to know right now. And if there's any state enforcement strategy from California or a liberal state that's designed to be contradictory, in other words, incompatible with what the federal government's trying to do, then we would obviously be against it. If California was letting people in violation of federal law, that would not be okay. It's very different when you're saying, well,
I would say even one step further. I would say you can do things as states that might be like contradictory, but incompatible is not allowed. Like one could argue that a sanctuary city might be contradictory, but it's not incompatible.
It's not incompatible. Yeah.
Or like licensing like marijuana stores, I think might be contradictory, but not incompatible with how states are legally allowed to function. Yeah, I don't know. I would be curious about this California thing because I've never heard of this, but yeah. But I'm curious. But returning to the question though, like, would you be okay if California decided to open the border? Not open the border, but go down and like destroy parts of the border fence to let immigrants that they think should come to the United States in?
Of course not, Bayo. Hello?
Okay. Based.
Hey, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, actually.
Yeah.
Did you hear what Steven said?
Okay.
Hey.
All right. Well, hey, listen, Bayo, we love you. Be careful. Stay safe. Okay. We're going to find one more.
Yeah. All right. What the
Okay, who's got the strongest opinion here about the border stuff?
I think I might have the strongest case.
Go.
So, you mentioned the supremacy clause of the Constitution. We have a treaty agreement with Mexico.
Okay.
Yep.
We have a treaty.
Wait, okay, hold on, stop, wait, if you just joined, turn the stream off. Sorry, real quick, if you just joined, turn the stream off. Okay, sorry, go.
So we entered into a treaty in June of 2019 where anyone crossing the border seeking asylum would be returned to Mexico to have their case adjudicated there. The supremacy clause of the Constitution clearly establishes that treaties don't need a corresponding domestic law to be enforceable. So there's a difference between law and government policy, right? Isn't Texas just helping enforce the treaty agreement, and the supremacy clause would guarantee that that should be followed?
First of all, let's make sure the treaty was actually passed with advice and consent of the Senate, with 2/3 consent, number one. And because there are treaties and there are treaties, okay? So that's number one.
Sure.
And so whether or not the treaty itself is self-executing or whether or not it has the force of law might depend on whether or not it was agreed to with advice and consent of the Senate, which is provided for in the treaties clause. Number two, Texas is not a party to that treaty. Correct?
That's fair.
Yeah. So whether or not we're in compliance is a matter for the national government to decide. The treaty isn't Texas and Mexico treaty. It's it's United States and Mexico. That's the treaty, to the extent there is one.
So we have other disagreements between state and federal law, like marijuana legislation, right?
Sure, but there's no incompatibility there. I mean, the state, as a matter of state law, some states do not have criminal laws, state laws against marijuana. But that's not a law that says, in our place, you cannot enforce federal drug law. You can enforce federal drug law in states that have legal state marijuana, right? Agreed?
That's fair. I just think the lack of enforcement is more of a matter of policy when we have law. I mean, basically, we have immigration laws, right?
We do have immigration laws. That's correct.
It's just they're not being correctly enforced. So the state of Texas is choosing to...
Who gets to decide whether the laws are being correctly enforced?
The courts.
How about also the political
I think this
branches?
is legitimate.
How about this is not... And actually, courts have been reluctant to get into matters of immigration policy substantively. They'll come in if there's an administrative procedures violation or there's some constitutional concern, maybe they'll weigh in. But in terms of the actual enforcement, that's typically up to the political branches. That's up to Congress and the President of the United States.
I would agree with you about the reluctance. I even think, like, on matters of state and federal disagreement, like when California appealed their gay marriage ban, the Supreme Court declined to hear the appeal. I think the courts are not doing their job there.
Oh no, but come on, immigration law is special. We all recognize that. Immigration law is a special category of legislation over which the federal government has absolute supremacy. Now, you can have all the comparisons you want to gay marriage bans that aren't in keeping with whatever federal law, or you could say that the drug laws of the state are incompatible with federal drug laws. I don't agree with those comparisons. I think that state laws not having drug laws isn't incompatible with the federal government having drug laws. But however you want to slice it, the organizations, the entities that get to decide whether immigration law is being properly enforced or not properly enforced are the political branches of the federal government. Those are the entities in charge. If they wanted to, they could say, hey, we don't even have any immigration law anymore. That's proper enforcement. Proper enforcement is equivalent to no enforcement. You don't get to decide, state of Texas, that we know the proper enforcement of immigration law, because they don't have that authority, because it affects us all. It's the interest of national sovereignty. And so the decision about whether or not federal law is even being enforced correctly is not up for Mr. Abbott to decide. And it's not.
I guess we don't actually disagree there. That's fair. I just think the federal government is clearly not doing its job properly.
Okay, you can say as a matter of policy that, but you would agree that Governor Abbott should be brought to heel, that Governor Abbott needs to stop his unconstitutional, unlawful actions. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I'll consider.
I would also say I would say
those-
that the Controlled Substance Act, when we look at like drug legalization or whatever, I believe that I think that that's the same thing as a sanctuary city. States don't really have the technically, I don't think things are legal. I don't think that's like a category of things. I think things are like either misdemeanors or felonies or like infractions. There's like acts for these, but I don't think there's like a thing that's like legal. Like, is sex legal? Like, there's not, like, that's just a thing. So when you talk about like the Controlled Substance Act, you talk about like the federal government policy on banning drugs or making certain narcotics. The states can have the opportunity or have the can have the state position of like, we just don't enforce this, right? So when a state says we don't have laws on the books relating to marijuana being illegal, I don't think that's comparable to the border policy where you're saying like, hey, we're going to go and do this border policy because we think the federal government is failing. That would be a state saying like, hey, we're just not going to enforce this thing that the federal government feels because we're not just going to have this law on our books. I think that's like that's what it means to like make something decriminalized in a state. You can't necessarily make it like legal federally, but you can just say in your state, we're not going to enforce anything related to marijuana because we're not going to make that law or do that.
But imagine
we don't just decriminalize it though. We like some states, they have medical availability laws.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm just saying that none of that, I don't think any of that flows up federally. Like you can have, my understanding is, you could have a medical, please correct me if I'm wrong, I could be in a state, actually I don't know what the answer to this is, but my guess is I could be in a state, I have a medical marijuana card that's licensed by the state, given to me, and then I have all the marijuana that I want, blah, blah, blah. I think a Fed could still come up to me and I could get in trouble with that, no? Or is that protected somehow?
Yes, absolutely you can.
Oh, then yeah, well then...
and that does happen.
Then that's the argument then, right?
It's not comparable, yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, the only thing that would make it comparable would be like if a federal enforcement agency was about to break into somebody's house and then like a state police came up and they're like, hold on, this is an unauthorized entry. And the feds are like, well, hold on, we have our blah, blah, blah. We've got all of our shit around. They're like, no, because we don't want you to do drug policy this way. We disagree. We're going to stop you. Yeah. And then you say, well, hold on, no. Now we're talking supremacy clause stuff, right? Like you can't just on a state, contradict federal law enforcement like this or federal law like this or whatever. But I don't think supremacy clause means you have to enforce all the federal law. I also think that it's kind of confusing too, because like a lot of things that we think are like felonies or really, really bad things are all these like federal things. But the reality is like the vast, vast, vast majority of all crimes and everything are all state laws. These are all enforced by the states. Like I think there is federal murder, but like murder is always 99.9% of the times like a state charge, or rape is like a state charge. Like all of these things are criminalized by and enforced by the states as well. But I don't think they necessarily have to be. Like I think in a state you could make it so that like, well, I don't know if you get like other weird challenges around like equal protection, I don't know, or something weird like that. But I think a state theoretically could say like, oh, we're not going to make rape or murder legal, or we're not going to make this illegal. And if you want to, you can. Now, if a Fed busts you for raping or murdering somebody, you might get in trouble. But I think technically, a state could do it. They might face other constitutional challenges relating to it, but.
We have agreement. So, I mean, we agreed that what Governor Abbott is doing is wrong. It's incorrect. And that Biden should do something about it. The federal government should not allow this to stand. We can't allow states to be in open defiance of federal law.
Can I ask a question real quick? What exactly?
How do you guys have
would,
the
they
worst
do?
microphones ever invented? And I don't understand, guys. It's
I wanna
2023.
ask
You can get
you
like
a
the best mics ever for like $2 at Walmart. What do you? No, let's start. Go.
Let me apologize right quick because I'm like at work right now and I'm like
Okay.
using a Blue Parrot headphone.
Okay. All right. Okay.
But like, what does like the punishment for? Because they're gonna make the feds. They're gonna push the issue with the feds. What would like the punishment actually be for something like that? Like, what are they gonna do about Abbott doing this? And that's about it.
Yeah, if they are at the point where Biden is ordering the National Guard to enforce federal law or to stand down, or there's some federal asset that's attempting to take control of the situation, and Governor Abbott is refusing and using force or the threat of force to prevent that deployment, I think he should be arrested by the Department of Justice and he should go to jail. That's
Oh,
my.
come on.
What do you mean? Come on.
You sound absolutely ridiculous right now.
Wait, why is that ridiculous?
You guys
Explain it.
sound- Let me ask you a question. Have you ever
Wait,
been
no,
to the
wait.
border?
Why is that ridiculous? Can you explain that?
Have you ever been to the border?
Why is that ridiculous? Of course I have. Why is that ridiculous? Can you get to the state of the argument instead of going personal?
I'm asking you. Have you ever been to the
Wait,
border? Do you know what's going on right now? You
So
sound
can
so
you make the argument without going personal?
It's not personal.
Yes or no?
It's
Yeah, you're
all of
saying
us, okay?
you're
I'm
presuming
trying to
that
tell
you're
you,
presuming that
we
you're
have
presuming that we've
people
never been to the
coming across
border.
the border.
You're presuming we've never been to the border, and
They're
you're
coming
saying
across the border. They're abusing the asylum system. Okay?
you're presuming that we've never been to the border, that we've never had clients who have been in the immigration system. Some of us, let's say, hypothetically,
Yes.
that we haven't.
You're a lawyer. Yeah, we get
Okay,
it.
so then why don't you stick to the argument and stop trying to attack the person making it? How about that? For once.
The idea that he would arrest a sitting governor is completely absurd.
Oh,
And
really? Is it absurd?
I think it sounds. It's highlighting
It's not
that
absurd.
you
It's
live
not
in an
absurd at
ivory
all.
tower,
In fact, it should happen. To be honest, like at this point, like Texas is so crooked that there should be something done about it. I wish that we could just like vote him out, but like I like we're so like gerrymandered and we're so right leaning that I don't know how like that would ever even happen. But I appreciate the answer to the question. I'm out.
Love you.
Okay, can I continue now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to ask Pisco. Has he ever been to the border?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so
What does that have to do with that? Can you explain why that has to do with anything?
I'm trying to say. Okay, have you seen the latest Channel 5 video?
Wait, what does that have to do with anything?
He blew this whole situation wide open. Okay, he's
Are you
got people
trolling?
on video walking across the border. The cartel just lets him in.
Okay, you're trolling.
No, I'm not trolling. I'm serious.
Are you
Go
trolling?
watch the latest Channel 5 video.
Okay, can
People
you tell
are
me?
using the asylum system.
Okay.
Oh, it's literally on video. They got people coming in. They're burning of documents when they come in, and then they're saying, "I claim asylum." And then what are the people of Texas supposed to do? They're just supposed to let them wait there.
Is
Because
there a
Biden
right?
hasn't
Is there a
decided
right
do
to
anything?
asylum? Is there a right to asylum procedures for individuals who arrive at our ports of entry? Yes or no?
I mean, yes, but then the federal
Okay, is that a
government-
part of federal law that at the very minimum you have expedited removal proceedings, and that you get seen in front of at least somebody to adjudicate
Yeah,
your
but the
claim?
problem is, and they show this in the video.
Wait, can we
is
answer that question? Is that a part of our current immigration law? Yes or no?
Yes, but the problem is
When
they're
you
not
say enforce
expediting them.
immigration law, when you say
Problem
enforce
is they're not
immigration,
expediting them.
wait,
They're just having
I just want
citizens
to
stay
make
in
this
the
clear.
state.
I just want to make this clear. When you say enforce immigration law, you say excluding the asylum laws and procedures. That's what you mean, right? Ignore those.
I don't know what you're talking about. If you just let me finish, I'll explain what I'm talking about, okay?
Should we ignore the asylum procedures that are established by federal statute? Yes or no?
I don't know what that means, okay? I don't even know what you're talking about.
Do you know
I'm trying to
asylum?
say, when
Asylum
they
is
come in,
a.
they're keeping them in the state. They're keeping them in Arizona, Texas, whatever. Does that not become a problem for Arizona or Texas when they come in?
I'm sure it becomes a
Wouldn't
problem.
it be the federal government's
That's
job?
not an argument. Whether it becomes a problem, immigration can be a problem. You don't have a right not to have problems.
What do you mean you don't have a right to not have problems?
A state
What does
doesn't
that
have a
even
right
mean?
to be free from problems. I forgot. I missed the part of constitutional law where we were talking about how states have an inalienable right to be free
Okay,
from
so
problems.
What you're saying is basically anyone has a right to come to the border, claim asylum, and they get to be housed in Texas until their court date. That's what you're
I
saying.
didn't say that. I said that federal law provides for asylum procedures and for individuals to claim asylum. Do you agree with that, or do you not agree with that?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Does federal law provide for asylum procedures for individuals claiming asylum?
Yeah, I agree with that in spirit, I think.
Okay, so should we follow those immigration laws?
Yeah, but the problem is...
So what's your issue? What's your deal?
The problem is these people are being housed inside the states, so isn't it their right that they don't
Should they be housed some... Wait.
Wait.
Okay, well, first of all, a lot of them are... There was a Remain in Mexico policy, and I actually think that there's some asylees or people who are claiming to be asylees are being housed outside of the country. So just as a matter of fact, you're not correct about that. I don't believe that. I actually think that there are many asylum claims that are being adjudicated outside of the country. But even if it weren't the case, you agree these people should have their claims adjudicated. You just said that.
Yeah, I agree in spirit, okay? But the problem is that people are abusing the asylum system.
Oh, there it is. There it is, folks.
No,
the conservatives say they're law and order, except when it's a law they don't like. Then they say, I'm okay with Abbott doing something illegal.
Listen.
Except when it's those, pesky asylum laws,
Okay,
right?
you
Who needs to follow those?
Get off your soapbox for a second so I can finish, okay? They're abusing the asylum system in the way that they come to the border, they burn their documents, they walk in, they say, I claim asylum. Then how
Change
do you
the law
know
then.
if
Change the law then. I don't know what to tell you.
What do
Change
you
the law.
mean change the law? What do you mean change the law? What does
Well,
that supposed to mean?
As
So
you're aware, if you don't agree with asylum...
Take infinite people in because we have to change the law?
If you don't agree with asylum, get rid of the law. It's the law. Isn't it the law?
You know more about the law than I do. I'm sure you know how hard it would be to change the law, don't you?
Well, that's a democracy.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as like federal law goes, that shit's never going to change.
So you're saying because it's hard, democracy's too hard. It's too hard to convince their fellow citizen. Wasn't it you, like the conservatives that are telling us that we need democracy for abortion issues? That's not hard.
I mean,
this is the problem with conservatives like you. I just want to say, this is the problem with conservatives with you. You all agree with democracy when it favors you, but you have no principles and no values. When it's too hard, then you're okay with doing a little end run, a little insurrection here, a little, fake elector scheme there, and a little end run around asylum laws there. Like it's no consistency. You guys don't believe in law and order. What you believe on, what you believe in,
very specific soapbox voice. It's very
what
good.
you believe in,
it a lot.
What you believe in is your policy preference being imposed on everyone who disagrees with you, regardless of what democracy demands. That's what you agree with.
No, that's not what I agree with. That's what you're saying I agree with, which is what you're good at, by the way. You're good at saying what other people think and then claiming that they do.
Arkin, this is a little parallel to my argument. Do you mind if I jump in for a second?
Go for it.
Not at all.
Okay. So one thing that always really deeply struck me is Antonin Scalia. Is he had this point where he made a speech and he said, there is no procedural right for the factually innocent to not be put to death. And there's some validity to what he's saying, right? It's like, well, what is factual innocence actually means? But on the flip side, I think that anyone upon hearing that is going to say, wait, that sounds deeply unjust. It's like if there's someone that is very likely to be factually innocent of the crimes that they're found guilty of, there should be some sort of procedure. We don't want to execute even one innocent person. And so I think what we're seeing here is you're saying, okay, this is the law as it stands here. But a lot of people essentially want some reform, or they want like easy changes. So if Biden is saying, I want to move all this Constantino wire, if he has the authority to make that decision, he could also make the opposite decision, right? And say, okay, we're going to enforce immigration law, but we're not going to interfere with Texas's state decisions in this matter too, right? That would be within his authority?
Who are you asking?
Oh, so I'm asking, would it be within Biden's authority to not disagree with Texas's or not interfere with Texas's
Who are you asking?
measures? Pisco.
Yeah, Biden could do the opposite of what he's doing, yes.
Yeah. And then, so the easy kind of requirement becomes, it's like, okay, even if we acknowledge that there's technically, because of the supremacy clause, there are some rights for him to do this. I think a lot of people are saying, well, he should choose otherwise, because we do have these centralized problems that are just in a few states. And the federal government doesn't seem to be providing actually solutions that help alleviate the undue burden on specific states.
Mm-hmm. You're saying as a policy matter, he should change.
Wait, can I real quick?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. This is the issue where you guys are fighting on, and I think it's important to recognize where you're fighting. Okay?
Yep.
The issue is you guys feel like something bad is happening with immigration in border states, namely Texas. You feel like too many illegals are coming in, or it might even be the fact that too many illegals are coming in, and the federal government, the way that they are choosing to enforce the policy, okay, legislated to them by Congress, is inadequate or ineffective, or you have massive moral disagreements with how it's being done, okay? All of these things might be true, but this, unfortunately, is not the ground to fight on, because legally, this particular enforcement is fully and 100% within the purview of the federal government, and the state government just does not have the right to act here. And I think that the thing you have to be careful about is when you start making moral arguments that defy procedure, you're opening up such an unbelievable can of worms that essentially says, as long as you don't like how the federal government is approaching an issue that's within the purview of the federal government, the state can do whatever they want. And while we might feel giddy and happy and excited to watch a state enforce immigration law in a way that we see fit, there are a million other things that we could probably say quite easily state shouldn't do. Right? We want to protect our people, and we want to put money towards our homeless people. So we are no longer going to have any of our citizens pay federal taxes because we don't want to support the military. We're going to take all that money, we're going to collect it as a state tax instead, right? I imagine, assuming you're not like a libertarian opposed to all taxation or whatever, you'd say like, well, hold on, you can't do that. You can't just say that we're going to defy federal tax collection because we oppose the military. There are like a million different things that other states could do that we would not want them to do, even if the state and all the population disagrees with the federal law, because the breaking of that procedure would necessarily break like all parts of our federal system. We would devolve into 50 different countries, and then those would devolve into different, cities and districts, and it would just be chaos. And I think the test of the test of our federalized system is, unfortunately, saying like, well, fuck, right now there's like federal policy that we disagree with that kind of sucks, but all you can do is like the remedy for that is in the federal system. It has to be in Congress. And as it stands right now, conservatives are already given a huge amount of structural benefit, whether we're talking about how districting is done for the House, which favors lower populated areas, or whether we're talking about the upper part of Congress, the Senate, which favors land over people, and that every state is allotted 2 people, or whether we're talking the Electoral College, which is favoring land over people because more land, more states get electoral votes that are not proportionate to the population. So there's already a lot of parts built into the government, I think, that would favor conservative ideas. But if you have all those things going for you and you have a disagreement on federal law, the answer, it could be, if you want it to be, it could be like open revolt or rebellion or insurrection. That's fine, it could be. You just have to be honest about what's happening and say that like, this is what's gonna happen. We don't like this federal law so much, we're going to be an open revolt or rebellion against the federal government to do it. It can't just be selectively following procedure or rule of law when it benefits you and then not when it doesn't, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'd agree with everything you said there. I actually have a question, and then for Pisco specifically, because this falls into your expertise. Does equal protection prevent states from giving increased penalties to illegal immigrants for, say, a state-level crime of jaywalking, for example?
So first of all, I don't want to claim to have an expertise. I'm just a dumb lawyer. Lawyers are dumb generally, and so just don't believe what I say on face value. Don't trust me just because I am a lawyer. Like I'm a baby lawyer, and so I don't have any specific authority on constitutional law. But I happen to know that a protected class, so far as state. So the burden analysis, right, for equal protection purposes, has to do with whether or not you are there's a protected class at stake. And one protected class is, or one area where you're not allowed to discriminate all the time, is based on alienage for states. Alienage referring to whether or not you're a citizen or not. The federal government is able to discriminate on the basis of alienage, but states are not always able to discriminate on the basis of alienage. So I think that that law that would treat non-citizens worse than citizens for purposes of state criminal law would probably be challenged for an equal protection violation, and I would say likely the non-citizen would win.
Okay.
Yeah.
But let's actually, it's kind of related, so that like constrains some things. But let's say that, for example, Abbott said, okay, I am not formally, officially enforcing any federal immigration laws, but rather I am going to be very strict in terms of, say, this strip of land, which happens to be at the border of the state, enforcing anti-trespassing laws, or, for example, loitering laws, failure to, say, like a variety of like different crimes which you might reasonably commit in the process of immigrating illegally. Would you disagree with that on a legal basis? Would you have a moral?
So if instead of phrasing it as immigration law, you just define this area in the border as some kind of special respiratory area that people who violate that go immediately to your state prisons. I think that those are, there's some difficult questions there for sure, but to the extent that you are trying to use this power that you're calling the trespass power, or the power to define the scope of property rights for public usage or whatever, and you're defining it in terms of alienage, right? Because I'm assuming you're doing that. You're saying we're going to treat non-citizens worse. Then I think that there would be,
well,
and if it's clear it's a ploy.
I mean, I think you also you just kind of run into like, this isn't going to do what you want it to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's say for instance
you go to jail for trespassing.
Exactly, yeah. Because remember, you can only enforce your state law. I don't think a state can make a law about immigration. They can't, because it's a state. You're just a state, right? So let's say that you were to set that issue up. You set up, so you've got the brilliant idea of, we're going to just set up our own border behind this thing where we highly enforce trespassing. We get our own huge wall. We've got all the things, blah, blah, blah. You could do that. But now you've just become literally the best funnel point for every illegal immigrant wanting to the U.S. Because what they'll do is they'll run to that point, and then, oh shit, the Texas Guard is here. They arrest us. However, the only thing you can arrest us for is trespassing. You're going to have like cruel and unusual punishment if you try to lock people up for life for trespassing. You're not going to change those laws, I don't think. So somebody basically goes to one of the state jails. You convict them and everything. Now they're in jail for 30 days or whatever, misdemeanor crime, I don't know what, for trespassing. And then what? You release them? You can't ship them back to Mexico. You don't have the authority to do that. I don't know what authority a state has when it comes to releasing somebody from state prison. Are you allowed to drive them somewhere? Now you just have like all the illegal immigrants flooding your prisons and then getting,
and you're not going to get them all. And
you're
not going to get them all. You're going to be spending a shit ton of money because all these people deserve trials, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about criminal law.
You have to prosecute all of them.
People, yeah. And now they all have the right to attorneys, right? They all have, because there's a right to representation for indigent defendants. A lot of these people will be indigent defendants. And so, I mean, you can try it, but it's not going to turn out the way you think, and it's not going to be effective. That's why they want to have this razor wire. That's why they want the federal government in charge, because it's too much for, I don't think they have a willingness to do it. Well, they probably would, actually, to be honest with you. But I think that they would incur substantial costs to do this. But it's not their role to do it. And even if they did, it wouldn't stop the problem.
Pisco, I have a question for you, and then I'll go.
Yeah.
Do you think the federal government has a place stepping in with the interstate conflicts that are arising from this? For example, like Texas busing tens of thousands of migrants to New York to the point where it's like broken New York City's budget.
I don't know. That's a tough question. On the one hand, I think that yes, but on the other hand, like I don't know that the states are unless they're doing fraud. Like, what law would the states be breaking by voluntarily entering into like contracts with non-citizens? I don't think that there's a law broken there necessarily, unless maybe you could pass a federal law that made it a crime or something, or sanctionable or not allowed to get into agreements for transportation for non-citizens. But I imagine that it's not something I would support. So I don't even think necessarily that Ron DeSantis, these people, to the extent they're not doing fraud, right, are committing crimes. To the extent they're doing fraud, it might be a crime, right? Or they might be illegal. Right. But to the extent that they're just like voluntarily entering into transportation agreements and paying it themselves, I don't know what a legal objection you could have to that. Maybe I'm just not thinking of it.
Yeah, and I think we have sort of guaranteed right to transit between states anyway. That would
Sure,
be
yeah.
super
Like,
legal.
what would be like wrong with the state being like, hey, do you want to go to Boston? And they're like, yeah, we'd love to go to Boston. You're like, okay, here's $1,000 for a plane ticket or whatever, bus ticket or whatever, to get up to Boston from fucking wherever you are, Arizona. It wouldn't even be that expensive.
I just worry that those like interstate conflicts are also like a powder keg that's going to explode at some point.
I'm not as concerned about that stuff. I mean, that is like, there are limits to like that quote unquote busing policy, and there's also an argument from like fundamental fairness from the southern states where like, hey, why should we have to bear the brunt of to the extent that there is a brunt of like non-citizens and shit. I don't know that it's my biggest concern so far as immigration is concerned.
All right, thank you.
It's a stunt. It's like a political optics stunt, but
Wow.
no one's willing to defend Abbott's actions. Crazy.
Can you ask them when next time you get a contestant? Can you ask them like if they think this is such a severe issue that they would support Texas going to the war with the U.S. government, seceding, whatever? Because like everyone says, yeah, they have the right to do this. Things are so bad. Well, have them qualify how bad it is and whether or not it's actually justified to suffer the repercussions, for the people of Texas to suffer those repercussions.
They're about to find out, I hope.
Okay, I'm dragging in the next lot. Good luck.
Wait, hold on. Steven, are you eating?
Oh shit, tonight. No, not tonight. Sorry. Back to normal tomorrow, yeah.
All right.
Love you.
Bye, guys.
No, not tonight. Turn off the stream if you're in here. Losers. Sorry.
All right, real quick to answer what Lycan said and made my last point before I get out here is I think there's maybe some indefensible takes here. But it's very easy for you to attack them because it's like, okay, should governors just be able to do whatever the they want without regard for federal law? But then I think, though, Pisco, is you're actually a lot of your stances coincidentally, but also not so coincidentally, line up with a fairly pro-immigration stance. Because again, the Biden administration could choose to do otherwise, and so could Congress. For example, we can say, okay, yeah, the ultimate immigration authority is federal, but I mean, we devolve authorities all the time, or we
Hold
have
on.
like
Wait.
parallel structures.
No, okay. I think yes, in one way, like Pisco might be favoring this because it favors immigration policy, but like depending on the thing,
I resent that.
Well, I'm sorry, hold on. I'm saying that his view happens to line up with that, sure. But like in other senses, like right now, I think Pisco would agree, I think, that like states as it stands right now have the ability to decide how they want to treat abortion, right? That's been, as for the Supreme Court, that's been relegated to a state issue. The federal government doesn't have a right to intercede there. That really sucks for progressives.
Well, sorry, the courts have not gotten involved. I haven't said that the federal government doesn't have a role.
Wait, what do you mean the courts haven't gotten involved?
So Congress could pass legislation, I think, nationalizing some abortions.
Wait, what does Congress have to do with the courts? I'm saying like the courts and the Supreme Court has decided when they overturn.
The Supreme Court has said
that
there's no right to it, but I don't think that the federal government therefore doesn't have a role to play. Just separate.
Oh, sure,
out.
potentially, sure, yeah, potentially. Yeah. But as it stands right now, states seem to be within their legal authority to outlaw abortion if they want to, right? Which I imagine, on a moral level, I think Pisco would disagree with that.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would as well.
On the legal level,
but yeah,
I don't think it's insurrectionary to do that. I don't think it's now. Back in the day when Texas was like defying Supreme Court precedent with their bounty hunter law, I thought that was really, really bad. But the Supreme Court then like very quickly showed an appetite to overturn Roe v. Wade, and so then you're fighting on the merits in the court. But we lost. We lost. Roe v. Wade is overturned, and that's just what happened. And we abide by the law. So I don't want the Biden administration to be doing something inconsistent with the Supreme Court's ruling. When Biden lost on the student loan shit, it was the most ridiculous opinion ever. Biden very clearly had the authority to cancel $10,000 of student loans. But did I say, no, Biden should cancel it anyway, even though the Supreme Court said no? No, I didn't say that. We live in a country that's supposed to be governed by the rule of law. And when you have people who are law enforcement coming here and saying, I support illegal actions, I mean, what country are we living in here, folks?
Wow.
Yeah.
What right does the state have to enforce? Like,
none. For immigration law, none, I don't believe, right?
Yeah, none. I think that they could
even in the
federal
case where the
government
state
allows
is
it, that's
even in the case where the state is quote unquote enforcing immigration law. What that enforcement looks like is you arrest somebody, you think they're an illegal immigrant. The next step is you turn them over to the feds.
Call them, yeah.
That's all you can do. You have no authority past that to enforce U.S. immigration law. You just don't.
So the state's just kind of.
Well, they're not. This is a power that's been dealt the same way that California is. They decide that they want to let in a whole bunch of immigrants, but they're not allowed to because the federal government says no. Yeah, it's immigration is the purview of the federal government. Or the same way that you're in California or San Francisco, if you don't support the United States sending money to to Israel to genocide Palestine or the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip, you still have to pay your federal taxes. There's nothing you can do about that. California can't contravene there because it's not in their purview as a state to do that.
There's a big ANCAP. I don't know if it's Millet being elected or some shit, but people seem to be wanting to only care about the law when it's stuff that they agree to.
Yeah, but that's not ANCAP. That's
about.
Just partisanry. Right.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Well, in some cases, technically, I would say that sanctuary cities and also marijuana, even though you say, yes, there's legal precedent for why that's technically different, the feds can't commandeer state apparatus is, I think a lot of people have actually said, wait a second, this just kind of ignoring federal drug law actually worked out really, really well. Or historical examples like the Fugitive Slave Act, with the northern states just saying, no.
It's not, hold on. I take issue with this technically, there's some insane legal loophole. It's just the states don't have to enforce federal laws. The states don't have to do anything about, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think states have to do anything about currency manipulation or whatever, right? If you find fake dollars, you could, well, no, actually currency is different. You can't say we accept fake dollars, but you don't have to turn that over to the secret
currency. Before,
they were, yeah, but
were they?
They were, yeah, they were.
Some act gave the United States. I know to make fake U.S. currency is literally a federal
part of the Constitution. Part of the Constitution gives Congress the authority to mint money and shit like that. And, and there's some exclusive areas of federal jurisdiction and federal legislative authority for sure, but
I don't think states are ever forced to enforce federal law like that. Where
the only time is certain state courts are required to, because the judicial system is a little bit different, where the assumption is that state courts would be the ones to enforce federal law in the courts. But that's not necessarily true of the political branches of the state governments, which need to be answerable to the people of those states, which is why there's a commandeering doctrine that prevents the federal government from just usurping the political branches of the states and just deputizing every state actor to become federal actors. And that's to protect the sovereignty of the states. It's done to protect the states.
Sure. But on the flip side, we have had some things upheld, for example, national highway funding directing minimum drinking ages to be 21. Or
that was hang on, that was voluntary. That was voluntary.
Yeah, voluntary, but coerced by federal funding.
Well, wait, hold on. Coerced by federal funding is different than, because you don't have. Doesn't Montana not? Isn't there one state that doesn't accept federal funds for highways, and you can something you're 18, the drinking age? Am I making that up, or
some things have been held unduly coercive, but it was not the highway funds.
Yeah,
it was the the Medicaid. Either the Medicaid, I think it was the Medicaid expansion in the Affordable Care Act case that was deemed unduly coercive. But that's to protect the states. That's to say, the federal government is giving a benefit to the states, and you can't make such an amazing benefit contingent on your following.
Apparently, it's 21 in all states now. I thought there was one state that broke.
And that's to protect the autonomy of the states and the sovereignty of the states. It's all protecting this division between the federal government and the state government. That's been consistent in all these rulings.
Oh wait,
the Supreme Court is very clearly laying out the differences between the federal government and the state government, and it's trying to protect the sovereignty of the state governments. And that means dividing their powers. The federal government is a government of limited powers, but when it invokes one of its limited powers,
is murder federally illegal? I believe it is, but most murder is a state crime,
and that's clear in the intent of the Constitution in Article 6 of the Constitution, the Supremacy Clause. And if we don't believe in that, then we don't believe in the Constitution. And you just think that, I don't know, we should all go back to the Articles of Confederation, or we should get rid of the Union, because that's what our entire Union is premised on, is a union with different spheres of sovereignty, but where the federal government is at its apex it overrules state governments.
What are your thoughts on the dissenting opinion on this case?
There's not a big opinion on in terms of, you're talking about the fence case. This is like an emergency application, injunctive relief thing. There wasn't any like reasoned opinion given. It was like, we're going to grant the stay, and these people dissent. They didn't like have an opinion about it other than a summary opinion saying this is granted and these people dissent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
The official case hasn't been decided yet. It was granting, but one of the factors in granting a stay or granting an injunction is likelihood to succeed on the merits. So typically when an injunction or a stay is issued, we know pretty much where the Supreme Court is leaning. It's possible that they could rule the other way, but it's very likely now that the Biden will win the merits.
Is there any precedent, for example, if you think the U.S. government has the responsibility to do something, and then let's say hypothetically they completely abdicate that responsibility, let's say they don't do it at all, do you think a state has any right or authority to intervene, even if it was against the federal government's wishes? For example, let's say hypothetically that the U.S. federal government was in fact not enforcing any border law at all. All right, they carte blanche, complete abdication of that responsibility. Do you think the Texas government would have any reasonable grounds to
sue for? I did some research into this back when I was in law school, and it's basically, do you have a duty to legislate or duty to regulate? Can you sue the government for not regulating this in a given area? And there's not a lot of great case law on that, because I think it shouldn't be the role of courts to decide what policy should be, right? We typically want the political branches answerable.
Well, wait, careful. I think he's asking about that, the constitutional crisis question, basically. Let's say that the Controlled Substance Act is passed in Congress in like 1970. Mm-hmm. Let's say that the executive says, okay, that's
doesn't
cool.
Enforce it.
Yeah, we're not going to make the DEA like, yeah, sure, that's the law.
No,
the law and it's illegal. We're not going to enforce it. I don't think there's a history of that ever happening in the U.S., right?
I don't know that there's a single case you can point to, at least a federal case, where you've been able to successfully sue the executive government to say, you need to enforce this. Yeah. There's a case, I think it's called Heckler v. Cheney. Someone can look this up. Heckler v. Cheney, that's about this, I think. Anyone who's familiar with law stuff, look up Heckler v. Cheney or something like that. It has to do with the executive branch's discretion for enforcement. And that is typically like unassailable, right? One of the prime authorities of the executive branch is deciding what to enforce and what not to enforce. That's like the reason that we elect an executive that we trust, is to enforce law in a given way and not other ways, because there's limited resources. Like if we elect a president who says, I'm going to enforce all the drug laws in the books, we're allowed to vote for that person. And if the alternative is someone who says, I'm not really going to enforce the drug laws that much, that's a legitimate choice for us too.
Well,
now, it could be grounds for an impeachment.
To be clear, hold on. To be clear, when we call that a legitimate choice, I'm pretty sure that's why it's called a crisis, because we probably wouldn't consider that a legitimate choice, because the reason why it's called a crisis is because there's really no recourse, I think, other than impeachment. I guess you could argue maybe impeachment is the recourse if the president is like, we're not going to enforce any of the laws, right?
Yeah, that's an impeachment question, right? But if I elect someone who says, I'm going to pardon every federal marijuana offender, you think that we can't do that? And then how can you say that he's enforcing marijuana law if he just says, I'm going to pardon everyone who ever is convicted of this crime? He has the authority to do that.
I understand that the president has fairly broad powers to enforce laws in the way that he wants, right? But for example, let's say he did something that was, against laws. For example, let's say that he decided that he would exclusively pardon only white marijuana offenders, but not pardon any black marijuana offenders. Or just to extend the border hypothetical a little bit to a sort of an absurd degree, let's say that expressly against the will or law of Congress, the U.S. president decided to take an active role in busing the U.S. military, went down to Mexico and started just busing Mexican immigrants into the United States, right? Crazy hypothetical. But let's say he does that expressly against what any reasonable person would understand the law to be. Do you think the state would have any legal grounds to say, okay, wait a second, what's going on here?
They could sue him and say what you're doing is illegal. but that's premised on what the president is doing being illegal, and you could get a court order that says that you have to stop this. But that's again premised on the illegality of the action, which here I don't think any of you people can say it's illegal for the president to take down a fence on the border. Can anyone reasonably argue that? No,
I'm not going to argue that. But what I'm going to say is, it sounds like what you're saying is, in order to change this, why not just vote somebody else? And you do realize that that just can't happen. Like after 4, like let's say for example, this is going on and like Joe Biden's first presidency. What are we supposed to do then? Are we just supposed to like kowtow out of the situation, just wait 4 years until we?
First of all, you're catastrophizing, and just even me accepting this hypothetical. I just want to remind everyone: Joe Biden is enforcing immigration law. He is deporting a shit ton of people. He is absolutely.
I'm not saying.
Well, actually, and even that fact of the matter doesn't even matter. Let's say that he chooses not to. Yeah, you do have to wait 4 years. It sucks, but like, that's your only option, right? Because think of what you're saying on the contrary. If a state really didn't like a president that was legally elected, made it to office, sworn in, and starts doing his duties, and they really didn't like it, we can just say like, well, it looks like for the 2024 election year, these 6 states reject the president. Like that can't be, right? Right?
Yeah.
So it sucks. I agree that it sucks. I mean, it sucked for Trump. It sucked that he was the president, but he is, right? For 4 years. That's how it works, unless you're going to impeach him.
I was going to bring up a question about, so Pisco, are you saying that any law that's passed, the president is ultimately responsible for deciding themselves how much they want to enforce that law?
No, I think that there are mandatory things that Congress can impose on the president and duties, right? But there's a limit there. Congress doesn't have the authority to enforce the law. The executive does. And to the extent that you can say it's an enforcement action, right? Then Congress can't enforce it, right? There's a very awesome, I don't know if it's awesome, but it is a case that exists about the legislative veto. And essentially Congress tried to give itself the authority to like rescind powers that it gave to the executive branch. And what the court decided in that case was, no, you can't do that. You can't usurp the president's role in enforcing the law. The president enforces the law. That's so like, are there ways to combat bad faith non-enforcement? Yes. There's the impeachment clause. There is voting for a new person. There is, some other, so like for instance, like the 25th Amendment, if you want to go there. But like, or you could have a court order to do certain things or refrain from doing certain things, but it is limited because guess what? We elect a president to enforce the laws. And if you don't like how the laws are being enforced, the primary mechanism for changing that is elections.
So like, would you make that same argument about like, say they passed a constitutional amendment that made marijuana illegal? You say that the president has the duty to uphold the Constitution. Does that change the like width he's given to enforce that, or is it still basically the same standard?
If there's an amendment that legalizes weed, you said?
No, that criminalizes it. Like, does Biden now have a higher duty to go further in enforcing that, like above what's required by a law? Or
yeah, and how does he enforce that?
The amendment is a little bit weird because you're saying the president. Imagine you had an amendment that said the president has to do something. Like, I don't know. I'm sure that you could have such an amendment and you could create such a text that purports to be mandatory on the president.
Well, we can just look at what did the Prohibition Amendment look like?
Yeah. But like there couldn't have been perfect enforcement of prohibition, right? The president has to decide when and how to execute the laws. Now, I'm not saying that it's impossible for you to write an amendment language that purports to be mandatory, but it's just reality that there's a limit on resources. Now, the prohibition of marijuana would have other kinds of effects above and beyond the enforcement issue, which are like, you probably couldn't get a license for selling marijuana. You could probably, like, there are other things and consequences above and beyond the enforcement stuff. But we live in a world of material reality, and it's going to be difficult for you to be like, the executive has to charge every single person that they find doing X thing.
Did some states not follow prohibition? I'm so curious about this. Is it
didn't follow?
Yeah, were there some states that like we're not like marijuana? It's Maryland.
I don't know, and it's very different than the question presented here. The question presented here is like, it should not be difficult. Immigration law has historically been understood to be, if not plenary, close to plenary for the federal government. The court has described it as plenary, and so how could
Yeah, sorry. My understanding. So the it was 5-4. The decision was 5-4 on this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what the merits on the other side are, because I'm reading I think Alito put out a piece, right?
Did he?
Yeah, I think so.
When I read it, I didn't see anything.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe I'm not a lawyer here, so I'm looking at this. So I'm just trying to figure out like why this would be 5-4, right? If it's
it's such a good question. I think it's absurd that it is.
And my understanding is the language is that he's focusing on is that it seems to be the case that he believes that the U.S. government isn't reasonably enforcing like any sort of understanding of border law. Like the language is like shall versus may, basically letting people stay here. So that's why I asked the question earlier about, if you think that the U.S. government is grossly not enforcing the law, which seems to be the position of at least 4 members of the court or something resembling that. I don't have a perfect understanding of it. Then does this?
We don't know what the grounds are, honestly. And I mean, it could be that the court is saying, hey, just because the federal government has the authority to enforce immigration law or to build a border doesn't mean it's an exclusive power. But they lost. When you're talking about the Supreme Court, what do? You count to 5. I count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 justices have upheld or have, I think, issued a stay or an injunction, or otherwise like got rid of the Fifth Circuit's order, and so that's it. I mean, that's
sure. I'm not interested in what the ruling was, or
you're interested in the rationale. We don't have it.
Yeah, I'm interested in what it should have been. Right. For example, if the U.S. Supreme Court ruled tomorrow that all abortion is illegal, forever, I'm sure you would have issue with that. In the same way, I'm kind of wondering, I'm trying to get an understanding of is Biden really enforcing the border law? Because if he's not, I feel like there's merit for the state to do something there, right? Or maybe not. Is there?
I don't think so.
Well, here's the question. Let's say, let's say that we felt like Biden wasn't doing a good job in supporting Israel. Would there be merit for Texas to raise an army and then send them internationally in Israel to fight against Hamas?
No, but I don't think you could say that I don't think there's as much of an interest there, right? I think there's a very clear interest for the border. That's why I ask.
Who decides whether it's a clear interest or not?
Well, the people in the state. I think it's reasonable.
We would have to decide, right? Obviously, it's not written in the sky that. I mean, you could argue that any foreign policy issue can affect any state individually, but this affects Texas directly. So that's why I'm saying there's very, sort of direct line.
So anytime a state, right? Anytime a state thinks there's a clear interest in something, they can disobey.
I didn't say anytime. I said in this particular instance, right?
Okay, but how do you distinguish it? How do you distinguish future cases for people being like, wait, this clearly affects me more than others?
Well, you yourself said that this was relatively novel, right? So that standard would have to be developed over time, like anything else, correct?
What did I say was novel? I'm maybe not following. I think I said
when I asked you earlier about situations relating to sort of a dereliction of duty of a president not enforcing the law, you said that you had looked that up.
And the hypothetical amendment.
You said that was relatively novel.
No,
so that's
not novel. There's just okay.
There wasn't a lot of precedent for it, right? So,
there's not a ton of cases. There's not a cases upholding, if any, that I can think of, a lawsuit for failure to regulate, and I can't think of any in the federal context. That now this issue has come up before, but it's never come up from what I recall from my research, that would favor a lawsuit brought that says the Congress has to pass a certain law or the president has to enforce a law as against certain people. It doesn't happen with regularity from what I recall from my research. Again, I can't point you to specific things other than this Heckler case that I'm citing. I think it's called Heckler.
I looked that up, and that had to do with something relating to a death sentence, lethal injection, FDA. Does that sound right?
Yes, it does sound right.
Oh, okay.
So in that case, it was. Hang on, I'll get it. I'll explain it. Heckler v. Cheney. So this was a case where the procedure to be used was lethal injection, and basically there was an appeal to the FDA and they were like, "Hey, FDA, you should intervene to have some enforcement action to prevent this lethal injection or whatever." And they're like, "No, we're not going to do that." And they're like, "Wait, you should reach a conclusion." And the court's like, we can't review this agency's decision that's been sort of given to it. Their discretion has been mandated, or it's been imposed on them. It's not like something that we can review. And so it stands for the notion that the decisions of executive branch officials to take actions or not take actions that are within their reasonable discretion are not really subject to court intervention.
Oh, wait, hang on. I think both sides invoke heckler, because Alito mentions heckler, I think in his dissent. As the court acknowledges when it invokes heckler directly, the decision is not about staining, it's about the interpretation of the statutory exception to APA review actions committed to agency and discretion by law. So, it's...
So I would think
heckler
that, like...
expressly...
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
You go.
Yeah, heckler expressly contemplates that any presumption of discretion to withhold enforcement can be rebutted by an express statutory limitation of discretion, which is exactly what we have here.
I don't think we have that here, first of all. And
why?
First of all, it's a second, to the extent that there is a question of discretion or non-discretion in the use of the immigration power to detain people. That's usually what we're talking about, is whether or not there's mandatory detention for these immigration cases. It has nothing to do with the state involvement, right? They're separate issues. Whether or not the federal government has or does not have discretion to enact laws or to enact laws or to exercise enforcement in a certain way, that is a separate question from, in the absence of certain enforcement, do states have the power to supersede the lack of enforcement of the federal government? And my answer to that is no. Even if it's the case that there's no statutory discretion for this agency or whatever, it doesn't therefore result in the state having the authority to step in where the federal government won't. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't have quite enough to argue back into the details on that point.
I was going to ask, Pisco, do you think it's actually a likely scenario that Biden deploys some kind of force to go and arrest Abbott? Because I feel like that's extremely unlikely.
Listen, absolutely not. That won't happen.
But Biden is, I think, a de-escalatory guy. But if it comes to it, he should. Like, if Abbott is truly refusing to adhere to law, let's say that the federal government just decides to either federalize the National Guard there and take control of the border in those places, and Abbott tries to say no and tries to get them to have like a stand down with military force, I think he absolutely should. Whether or not he will, I think they'll try to find some way to de-escalate, maybe, or go to court and get a direct order ordering Abbott to stand down. And if Abbott continues and like defies court orders, then you have like a nullification crisis. And in that case, I think absolutely Biden should arrest, or the DOJ should arrest him. 100%. Think about that. Think about if we go back in the 50s. Yeah, if we go back to the 50s when we have Brown v. Board, right? And there's a governor, I think from Arkansas, right, who says, I'm not going to enforce Brown v. Board. The Constitution, your interpretation of the Constitution is not enforceable to me. And the Supreme Court said with one voice, oh, yes, it is. And the government said, oh, yes, it is. And they went down there with marshals to enforce the law. And that's exactly what I think should happen if it gets to the point where he's openly defying a direct court order or a directive from the President of the United States to take control of the border. I think that they should absolutely do that. Whether or not he will, maybe Biden will find another way. I trust that he doesn't want this to turn into a big political mess, but it is time to assert federal authority, and we can't let Texas be rogue here.
I mean,
that would be horrible precedent. I would criticize Biden for letting that happen.
I feel like the most likely scenario is just it's going to come down to whatever happens with the border funding bill that's in the Senate right now. If it gets passed, I think Abbott loses a lot of footing to stand on about he's not doing enough to protect the border.
Wait, really? You think Abbott will, if there's like 10 Republicans in the Senate who go along with the border bill and enough Republicans to side with the Democrats in the House, you think Abbott's not going to say this is the biggest bullshit in the world and we're not listening to it?
No, I think he'll stand down because I don't think there's any way that
No, he won't stand down. You think he's going to stand down? He's a lawless governor. He's a lawless governor. He doesn't give a shit. He wants to enforce his policies, and he wants to really, truly, he doesn't care. If Congress were to pass a law that says explicitly he can't do this, he's going to invoke. Look at this. The statement he just put out. He just put out a statement that said, "No other federal law can trump my right to self-defense as a state." That implies an intent that if Congress were to come to a different conclusion than Governor Abbott, do you think Abbott's going to listen?
I think Abbott's going to listen, because I think the alternative is, I think Biden would actually, if Congress passed some kind of bill saying, we're going to approve these kind of security measures, and Abbott still said, no, we're not taking it, I think Biden actually would send down some kind of
force. You think Abbott's going to give Biden a political win and be like, oh, he made a reasonable deal for the border, and this assuages all our fears, and so Biden actually did something good. Wow.
I mean, I think he'll do that over Biden sending SEAL Team 6 in through the roof of the governor's mansion to arrest him. I don't think there's any chance he's gonna...
what if they work out a deal, be like, hey, let's do this, we can make a wall or something. I'm just pulling something out of my ass at this point.
I hope that there's a way for Biden to avoid arresting people or having there be conflict. I don't want anyone to be hurt. I don't want them to have to arrest Governor Abbott. But I just don't think that Abbott is going to in his generosity, listen to the political branches of Congress or of the president. I think he's going to do what he wants to do. He has his own legal theory, and the rest of us be damned. And there's no reason to think that he'll do anything else. He's openly defying, and he's thumbing his nose at the federal government. He's saying that the federal government broke their compact with the states. It's an absolute challenge to the authority of the federal government, and he'd look like a weakling to stand down. And I don't think he won't.
It's also a little bit annoying that, I think that Biden can stand on strong legal ground when he says that the United States has exclusive purview of the federal government of, regulating immigration or enforcing immigration law. It's a little bit annoying that I could be wrong, but I don't remember hearing any Republicans scoffing at Donald Trump when he threatened to deploy the National Guard because he felt like states weren't dealing with riots well enough. I don't know if Donald Trump had any authority there as president to deploy the federal National Guard into a state because he felt like they weren't dealing with a protest well enough.
I think he might have.
Really? For what?
Yeah.
If they weren't threatening federal buildings or federal administration?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do think that. I think the president has the authority. If there were some insurrection or illegal combination, or there's direct authority for the president to federalize the National Guard in those instances.
Hold on. Well, careful. When you said insurrection against federal property, I could agree with you. But you're saying that the president of the United States, if, let's say in Georgia, let's say there's a giant protest that's raging through some city. It doesn't involve federal people, but it's raging through some city. And the governor says that they're dealing with it how they want to. They don't want the president involved. The president could just come in and nationalize that state's federal guard and then just go deal with it?
There's specific portions of the authorizing statutes for the National Guard and the militia. One of them is tailored to federal authority. It's section 332, I think, of Title 10. I could be wrong about that, but it says whenever the president, this is the federal one, whenever the president considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages, or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or suppress the rebellion.
That sounded like if it was in. That sounded like
that's the federal hook.
Yeah,
yeah. I think that there is a similar provision there for state things that states can't handle. I think that there is something there. I don't recall right now the specific statute, but I believe there is another source of authority for when states can't handle certain things. I think that's possible.
Okay. I'm not aware of it then.
Pisco, I just came in really quickly to ask you, did Destiny openly concede the self-defense argument to you yet?
Not yet, but we'll
Jessical is soying and shitting himself
Destiny's
through.
exact argument, and now that Abbott's making it, apparently Destiny's totally flipped.
Yeah.
That if somebody's not fulfilling their monopoly over force, and you're the person they're supposed to protect, apparently that's not a big deal now.
Oof.
Yeah.
Got you there.
That's an amazing argument. If Texas was an individual citizen and the federal government was just, what do you mean, what's the difference? I think that states and bodies of people that are part of systems have different obligations and responsibilities to themselves.
So individuals get in their infinite wisdom, individuals can defy the laws of a state, but not the state governments. There's a big difference.
There is a huge difference. Yeah, I would say there's a huge difference.
We want to let individuals defy the law, but not the state governments.
I'm not saying that.
I don't
I'm not
think
necessarily
Destiny's
individuals
position was ever to have like carte blanche to defy all laws in
yes,
general.
it is.
And besides, since when you get to just scale everything up, right? I don't think you can just like scale up everything from a person to a country. That's such a bullshit position.
Wait, hang on a second. He has said.
Hold on,
right,
wait, hold on. Let me understand this. You're saying that any single like law or moral judgment of an individual necessarily scales up all the way to the international union level?
I'm not saying that. But
okay, so then you recognize that there might be a different obligation that a state would have versus like an individual might have.
I can think of one, but I can't think of the rationale in this case of self-defense. I can't think of a convincing argument why we should have a higher threshold for individuals to break the law of self-defense in their own capacities, but not the state of Texas when it comes to massive incursions by illegal immigrants.
I think to make it comparable, I think the state of Texas would need to be looking at oblivion. I think that if it were the case, for instance, that 50 million Chinese or Mexican people were at the border,
you said it didn't matter.
It said that what didn't matter?
The fact of the matter did not matter. You said
no. He's saying oblivion, like an invasion.
I'm saying
accepting that part.
No, I'm saying if you're facing oblivion, I think that you could start to make different arguments. For instance, I don't think that a state has a right necessarily to secede, and also I might even, and I think I literally said I could grant that would be a type of insurrection or rebellion, but you would just own that. You would say, yeah, the state is going to be acting in rebellion of the United States or insurrection because they feel like they're facing oblivion. Sure,
I can buy the distinction, just tickle. I mean, that's something he can hang on his hat on. I don't agree with him, but it is a distinction, and he can say that.
No, hold on.
No,
now I got the rope around Pisco's. Like, now I'm going to drag Pisco for me. Pisco, you would agree that. No, okay. You can say I wouldn't agree with what the state of it was, but it's pretty obvious contextually what we're talking about. If Mexicans were coming over the border with nuclear bombs strapped to their back, then we're going to say, okay, well, hold on. If Texas wants to enforce immigration law, fuck it. I understand, right? There's going to be a difference there. Now, it would still be
everyone has a line. Everyone has a line. You're
of course.
Right.
It would still be an open insurrection or rebellion of the federal government of the United States. We would say they have a reason to do it. Yes.
You're right,
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Except in Destiny's self-defense argument, there was no imminent harm, right? It was the slowly stealing blades of grass over time. So
yeah, I think that's right. I think that we have a different line, and that Destiny puts it at his saxophone and his internet, and we put it at like slavery or nuclear destruction and shit like that. But that's just our different lines. Good. You know, it's our different lines.
Cool. Anything else, Big Dog, while you're in here?
No. Why are you acting like I didn't send this to you in a DM before I said it in
chat? You did. Why do you think it mattered if you sent it to me in a DM if you never actually voiced the opinion except in chat room and jokes?
Why wouldn't it matter? I'm confused why you just said that as if you had a huge own.
I pray one day, Justical, that I have a house and I see you stealing a blade of grass from me. I hope one day.
Is that apparently in chat you could miss it? I sent it directly.
No, the point of Big Dog, Small Dog is that you send me things in DMs or you type in chat, but you never actually come on to defend your opinion.
I just came on to defend my opinion.
Yeah, because I Big Dog, Small Dog memed you.
What's Big Dog, Small Dog?
Big Dog is the meme where you're the big dog and you're like, yeah, this is horrible. But then as soon as you show up in person, you're the small dog. You're like, well, actually, I understand your
argument. I don't think he backed up. To be honest, I think Justical just said he acknowledged that your position is consistent, but consistently stupid, right? I don't know. Justical, what do you think? Do you think he's consistent or not?
Well, it's not consistently stupid because you agreed.
No, it's not consistent because he literally said, I don't care what the underlying fact of the matter is.
About what? About the individual or about the state?
About the harm, the harm present, like what you're needing to
but he clarified that there is a level of harm for which he would say state
obviously, because I'm pretty sure this came up in the context of like, what do you do if a president, you don't like it for 4 years and they're doing things that are really bad, but you're like, well, let's talk about it. You deal with it. Like, that's unfortunately, that's it. Your only remedies are impeachment. But this is like, I'm working in the real world here. I'm functioning in the real world
here. That's what the thing is, I extend that to individuals. Yeah,
I don't understand how it doesn't extend.
Yeah, like in the case of individuals, I truly, truly think that there are very few circumstances where I'm going to be okay with them in the context of a system that is more or less democratic, more or less working properly, that I'm going to let them just make their own laws. But if you have like a North Korea, I'm not going to be like, okay, you have to follow the North Korean law. If you have like the system of, I don't know, what's another good one? If you're in like an anarchy state, if you're in Mad Max, I'm not going to impose that you follow the law of like whatever rival gang claims sovereignty in the area. But if you're in a place which relatively is responsive to democratic impulse, I think that you should follow the law there unless you have some superseding circumstance of the destruction of the foundations of that system. And I would see that in the state context as well. Like if it truly were oblivion for the state of Texas, maybe I'm with Steven there. But I just think we have a different line drawing thing where we're measuring the harm very, very differently. But I think Steven's moving a little bit on self-defense, a little bit.
I only took issue when he said he didn't care where the line was there. He said it doesn't matter.
Okay, I am very sorry. Let me qualify it more. I do care for the line. If Texas was facing oblivion, then I could understand them. Although even at that point,
sure, that
I think I would say
massive,
even at that point,
even at that point, standard for individuals.
I don't know. Hold on, you're trying to compare. You're comparing wildly different things. Also, I actually hold on. I shouldn't even bit the bullet on this. I don't know if I said that Texas would be like justified or be legal. I'm pretty sure. I think I capped my whole defense or presentation of the Republican side off saying, listen, if Texas wants to do this and wants to force immigration law, that's fine. Just admit that you are in like open rebellion against the federal government, that you're doing something that is not allowed by law. No, that's a cop-out, Stephen. What do you mean? What's a cop-out?
I think you would say around and find out for Texas.
Well, I mean, you would fuck around. You're obviously, if you're in, wait, hold on. What do you think if you're opposed to federal law, if you're an open insurrection rebellion means? Of course, the consequences from that are you're rebelling against the country, so things would follow naturally, of course.
Okay. But I mean, I just think that you're not going to be in support of that action. You're going to be like, this is wrong. They should face the consequences.
Sure, I wouldn't be in support of that action. Sure. Same way I wouldn't be in support of somebody killing somebody. I wouldn't be in support of somebody killing the blade of grass person if that was illegal in their state. Because we were talking about what the law ought to be, not what the law was. If the law says you can't kill people for trespassing your property, then you probably shouldn't, unless it's literally like you're facing like certain.
So you're going to let people infinitely steal from you a blade of grass?
If
that's the law says it.
Yeah, there's a difference between what the law is and how a person should act according to law versus arguing what the law should be. Nice, but that's always been the case. There's no contradiction there for anything we've ever said ever. When we were arguing self-defense before, we weren't arguing what the law is. That would be a very simple, very quick thing. What is the law? Oh, this is what you have to do. And then boom. The argument was what the law ought to be.
Then I fundamentally misunderstood our conversations going back 2 years. But that's cool.
Wait, hold on. No, stop. You thought that 2 years ago I was arguing that every U.S. citizen is legally entitled to kill people who steal blades of grass? You think that was my position?
Yes, I thought that was your position.
I don't believe you.
Justified, that it was justified morally, right?
Justified morally is not justified morally even against the law?
Yeah, so even if it's against the law to do it in the place, it would be justified morally.
I'm not sure.
So
now I have to go back and
think about your DDoS example, right? You think it would be moral to kill
but you would still have to you'd still suffer the consequences, right? So hopefully you don't get caught.
But you wouldn't it be immoral if you're not following the law of self-defense in a place where you're living and you're
I feel like the argument was over what the law should be. So saying like, wouldn't it be immoral to not follow the law seems a little bit circular in an argument over what the law
so let's
ought
go
to
there.
be.
Do you think the law should protect the blade of grass example or the attacks on DDoSers for people who feel that they're
I do think so. Yeah, I do think it should protect the blade of grass.
Then you haven't backed down, I guess. Yeah.